You may hear the name Sithis and immediately think of death, that he is death, the Elder Scrolls' Reaper, the scion of the End, because of his ties to the Dark Brotherhood. It is his bride who whispers in the ear of the listener, and it is her words that spur on the Dark Brotherhood's daggers. It is the wish of Sithis that souls be sent to him, be devoured by the void, and the Dark Brotherhood act as his harbingers. You would be right to fear Sithis, to hear the name and shudder, but if you want to understand him, even if that task is an impossible one, you must first understand that he is more than just this name, this identity. He is chaos itself, change incarnate, and a being of many names and faces. He is the eldest, a half of one whole, beyond even the Aedra and the Daedra. There is not a single pantheon in which Sithis doesn't appear in some form, and while the name Sithis is what likely brought you to this video, he is better known to the people of Tamriel as Padomay, chaos and change itself.
Tell him the words he has been waiting for all these years. Darkness rises when silence dies.
To understand Padomay, we must understand the creation of the world, Nirn. The problem is, no one can really agree on how the world was made. Each religion has its own creation tale, I guess like real life religions. While I've talked about the creation of the world as a bit of a project among the Ed Arda, the original spirits who eventually became the Aedra and Magna Gi, who smashed through the sky into Aetherius to escape the project once they had learned Mundus was draining their powers, this story doesn't have Padomay or Anu as the focal points. Now, I talk about this in greater detail in my Lorkhan video, which you can check out here, but I only talk about Sithis/Padomay lightly in that video because, again, it's all about the relationship between Lorkhan and Auriel/Akatosh. He doesn't have much of a presence in that version of the creation story, but another version, called the Anuad, gives us a much better idea of who Sithis, or rather Padomay, is or was. At least one version of him. The Anuad is the Aelid creation story, the guys who are also known as Heartland Elves and ended up becoming Pelennor Whitestrake's go-to victims, and the tale is the most primordial of the lot. Although do take it with a pinch of salt because the Aelid aren't exactly unbiased. You see, Padomay is a twin. While he represents change, chaos, and darkness, his brother, Anu, is the embodiment of order, stasis, and light. In the beginning, there was naught but the void, and when the twins, Anu and Padomay, began their interplay of light and dark, their togetherness created Nir, Arubis incarnate. Arubis represents the idea of possibility. Thus, from the void, from nothing, came everything, or at least the potential of everything. Anu and Padomay were pretty chuffed with Nir, believing her to be beautiful. Oh, and Nir is female in this. Now, the twins were so chuffed that they both fell in love with her, but Nir wasn't into polyamory, and only reciprocated Anu's love, much to Padomay's dismay. In the words of a certain fire prince ever looking for honour, that's rough, buddy. Now, with only 3 beings in existence and not wanting to be the one cuck, Padomay left into the void. Bitter. Still, Padomay hadn't actually told anyone about his feelings, so as far as Anu and Nir were concerned, he just up and left without any notice. When he finally gathered the courage to tell Nir how he felt, Padomay returned, only to find his crush pregnant with his brother's child. Oof. It got worse when Nir told him that she did not reciprocate his love, so he flew into a rage and became the first to commit a domestic abuse crime, backhanding her like Batman. Anu came to Nir's defense, and the pair fought like Dante and Virgil, causing Padomay to be banished out of time. After his banishment, Nir gave birth to her child, Creation, who I think is also Aetherius. and this birth resulted in Nir's death, and Anu, in his grief, became a deadbeat dad, entering the sun to slumber. While he had his kip, life began on 12 worlds, and after some time, Padomay managed to escape his banishment out of time, seeing his nephew or niece, the gender of creation isn't specified, and proceeded to absolutely batter them. And oh my god, this is just Devil May Cry. Any DMC fans out there? No? Anyway, in this battering, the 12 worlds were shattered, being loud enough to wake Anu from his slumber. And so the twins had one last epic duel. And I'm sorry, this is just Devil May Cry. I'll stop with the comparisons now, but in this epic battle, Anu once again proved himself the better warrior and managed to lay the smackdown on Padomay. He immediately got to work trying to salvage the 12 worlds and fix his child, creation, forming it into one world, the one we know today, Nirn. Only 2 worlds, the Elnafay and Hist ones, survived, thus leading to Aldmeris and Blackmarsh on Nirn. But as his work was done, Padomay declared that he didn't hear no bell, and stabbed his brother with a sword he got from somewhere. Devil May Cry. Anu, now injured, dragged both he and his brother outside time forever, saving his child from further damage, and the shed blood of the twins became the gods themselves, the Aedra and the Daedra. The Daedra came from Padomay's blood, hence their lack of a connection to Nirn, while Aedra came from the shed blood of both, tying them to creation and making them capable of both good and evil. Now, is this story in keeping with everything else we know? Not really. Although it does give us an origin for the Aedra and Daedra, this tale doesn't mention the likes of Lorkhan and Auriel in the creation of the world, who are also twins, and in the commonly accepted tale that we know, where Lorkhan tricks the Aedra into making the world, which results in Auriel getting his boy Trinimac to rip out his brother's heart, there seems to be much more evidence. Now we know this happened because the heart of Lorkhan's existence is undeniable. It powered the Numidium, made Vardenfell and turned up in Morrowind. We, the player, as the Nerevarine, literally see it. The sheer truth isn't exactly what I want you to take away from the Anuad though. Of course, it's a fun tale about Padomay that I wanted to share, but it also tells you a lot about him, or at least an interpretation about him. He is the Void. He is anti-creation. He appears randomly and is a major invoker of change, and he is primordial, being one of 2, he and Anu. Strangely, the Aelids see Padomay as against creation, which likely isn't the case. You see, the concepts of 2 fundamental opposites being at odds is a theme in the Elder Scrolls, and unnecessary. Aedra versus Daedra, elves versus humans, Anu versus Padomay, and Lorkhan versus Akatosh. You can also call it Shor versus Auriel, but the names don't really matter. What does matter is the link between Akatosh and Lorkhan with Anu and Padomay. They are reflections of each other in a way, and we see this in other interpretations of Padomay specifically. While in the Anuad, he's very much a devil-like force, or just an evil force of nature bent by bitterness to destroy all that is good. And while he was necessary in the creation of the world as we know it today, this isn't really how he's presented in other cultures. He is simply one necessary half, and his link to Lorkhan reshapes this perspective most.
What a fool you are. I'm a god. How can you kill a god? What a grand and intoxicating innocence.
While their Heartland cousins see Padomay through black and white lenses, the Dunmer actually think that Padomay, or rather Sithis, is the one behind the world's creation. Again, the changing of names for Sithis is quite common, but I'm going to cover the Sithis we know from the Dark Brotherhood later and we'll use that name then. For now, we'll stick with Padomay, and Vivek is the guy spinning tales about him. You see, according to the Ukrainian flag over here, there was nothing before Padomay. This nothing was Stasis personified, the Dunmer interpretation of Anu, as when everything is in stasis, nothing happens. Padomay comes storming into the picture, introducing chaos and sundering this nothing, introducing the idea of possibility and potential, or Arabis. In response, Anuel, effectively the soul of Anu, or just Anu with extra steps, emerged with the Aedra, enslaving everything in Aetherius in the hopes of maintaining order and stasis. Padomay wouldn't take this lying down, and so he sent his son, Lorkhan, to cause a bit of chaos, destroy the universe, and free those enslaved. This chaos came in the form of a pitch, a project to make the world, a world which would be nothing but pure possibility and have the chaos of life. This world would require the power of the Aedra, very technically destroying the universe as it was at the time, which I think Padomay was aiming for in the first place, and thus we get the creation story we're more familiar with, but with some added context. Lorkhan comes from Padomay, while Auriel, as with the other Aedra, come from Anu, and yet both are as necessary as each other. But you might now be sitting there with raised brows, and I get it, Vivek is a nutcase, so take what he says with a pinch of salt. But he's not the only one talking about the connection between Padomay and our boy Lorkhan. The Khajiit make the connection too, and have some weird proof with it. For context, the Khajiit creation story doesn't have Anu and Padomay as siblings, but rather mates, calling them Anur and Fadomay. And we'll use these names for a bit, because I don't really want to have to think about celestial incest. Now Anur and Fadomay are not just different names, they're cat versions of the primordial beings, meaning that they have fluffy ears, fluffy tails, and a constantly unimpressed disposition. God, Khajiit lore is so weird. They just make everyone cats. Cat Shegorath is right there, this is what he actually looks like to the Khajiit. But let's get back on topic. So anyway, Anur and Fadomay have some litters, because they're cats, with the first litter being the Aedra and the second being the Daedra. While Anur was initially happy with his kids, Fadomay said, let's have one more batch of kittens, but Anur wasn't too happy about this. So in this version, Anur attacks Fadomay during the birth of Nirni, essentially the spirit of the planet Nirn, Azura, which is a weird one because she's a Daedra, and the moons, Massa and Secunda, although the Khajiit know them as Jode and Joan. Oh, I should also point out that Fadomay is the mother here, so imagine getting attacked while you're giving birth. That's rough. Reasonably, Fadomay retreats, finding sanctuary in the void, where she gives birth to her final child, Lorkhan, or Lorkhan. Fadomay wanted grandchildren, although since there's nothing but gods running around, there's no place for it to happen. So, as is the wish of Fadomay, Lorkhan builds Nirni a home to have children by tricking the other gods, creating Mundus, leading us to the usual creation story. Fadomay would eventually die, and would secretly tell Azura on her deathbed to create the Khajiit, showing that the Khajiit are clearly pro-chaos rather than pro-stasis and order, with Azura being Fadomay's favoured daughter, and simultaneously one of the Khajiit's favourite gods. I guess as cats, being pro-chaos does make a lot of sense. Now Lorkhan, the Moon Prince, was the favoured son, and we see this a lot in his connection with the Void, with void beasts like this guy being the Fang of Lorkhan, and some Khajiit even see Lorkhan's corpse as the secret third moon, or the Dark Moon, and when the Dark Moon is out, the Khajiit are vulnerable to the Void. All this is to say that the Khajiit believe Lorkhan and Padomay to have a distinct and very special connection, being just beyond mother and son. It's more like mother and favourite son, and that Padomay, or I suppose Fadomay, is as responsible for the creation of the world, if not more so, than Anu, or I guess Anur, acting as the mother of all creation. This is something I really want you guys to realise. Padomay is not the devil of the Elder Scrolls. He's a bit more complicated than that, a bit more three-dimensional. Creation owes a lot to them, and we can see this most in the people of Nirn, primarily the humans and the elves.
Do you like this place? It took me the better part of a decade to perfect it. Every stone and flower tells a story, tales of how things were.
We've established a bit of a lineage here, going from Padomay to Lorkhan. While Anu had a lot to do with making Lorkhan, it has been established by two almost completely separate cultures that he is the special child of Padomay specifically. In contrast, Auriel, or Akatosh, is the special child of Anu, with Auriel and Lorkhan being linked as twins. Now, I have a full video on Akatosh, and that version of the god might kinda be a different being than Auriel, which is also explained in this video, but for the sake of this one we're going to work with Auriel here since this is the older version, and it will make sense later. Now, the reason why I bring up the lineage here from Padomay to Lorkhan and Anu to Auriel is that this is where the divide between humanity and elves in the Elder Scrolls comes from, or at least the traditional divide. It is so old that it is literally primordial. The pair are kind of hardwired to hate each other in a certain way. Sure, the Bosmer now venerate Y'ffre, the tree dude, and the Dunmer are busy with their Daedra squad, but we saw this connection to Auriel with the Snow Elves and see it now with the Outmer. They are very much followers of Auriel, the same Auriel who was their king and led them in battles against Lorkhan, who humanity knew as Shor at the time. Shor led humans, predominantly the Outmorans, with his wife Kyne, being their creator and I suppose all-mother. Thus, if you're on the side of humanity, possibly playing a human yourself, your existence is because of Padomay, but you'll notice that I've been saying Padomay instead of Sithis this entire time. This is partially because I want to get the image of the Dark Brotherhood evil demon shadow murder void thing out of your head a little, but it's also because the name Padomay seems to be linked more to Anu than the name Sithis. It is important to realise how complex Padomay is, how multifaceted this being is, how he's so much that it's almost difficult to really put it into words. They are both a destroyer and a creator, contradicting almost, depending on the story you're looking at. But let's be honest here. If I were a betting man, I'd be willing to put a few pennies down on the chance that you're here because Dark Brotherhood Sithis is the one you want to know more about. But this connection isn't exactly the easiest to explain either.
Oh, Cicero is just the keeper. I keep. I look after our matron, you see, the Night Mother.
As we well know, the Dark Brotherhood is this professional and yet cult-heavy assassination organisation, and the way that this guild is represented in Skyrim shows that the cult-like elements are vital to the identity and success of the Brotherhood. Astrid took the guild away from this, making herself a more traditional leader while leaving behind the tenets of Sithis. And because of her actions, her family is either destroyed or the guild goes to the last Dragonborn to restore it with its religious elements back to the forefront, and under Jon Skyrim's leadership, the Dark Brotherhood is once again allowed to flourish. You might then think that these cult elements and the reverence of Sithis as the Dreadfather is something that the Dark Brotherhood started with, but this may not be the case. The Dark Brotherhood is actually an offshoot of the Morag Tong, although not officially endorsed, because the two organisations are bitter rivals. Now, you might know the Morag Tong as the political assassination specialists from Morrowind, who are known to worship Methala as their patron goddess. Well, that's according to one story anyway, while others say that the Dark Brotherhood was actually an offshoot of the Thieves Guild, who worship Nocturnal. Either way, Sithis isn't the guy put right at the top here. Now, some theorise that when the Morag Tong were forced into putting Vivec and the Tribunal above Methala to stay in Tamriel, the more religiously zealous among the Morag Tong left to form the Dark Brotherhood, although they would eventually transition to Sithis worship as time went on. Another story states that Sithis spoke to a former employee of the Morag Tong to start a new guild so that his hunger for more souls in the void could be satiated. Either way, the crux of it all has Sithis as the hungry nothing, the representation of the void that seeks to consume, being what is beyond oblivion and ethereous. He is dread itself, and has a lot less to do with creation, seemingly being more in line with what we saw in the Anuad. He is also one of a pair, and while Anu is usually the other half, the Dreadfather has a Night Mother, a bride to whom his will is spoken. But who is the Night Mother? The Night Mother is a confusing figure. Some state that she is mortal, others say that she is divine, but much like the Dark Brotherhood's connection to the Morag Tong, it all begins with the Dunmer. Some say that Methala, the Daedric prince of murder, lies, deception and weird spider stuff, is the Night Mother, and since she is one of the three good Daedra and Dunmer religion, there's the link with the Dark Elves. It's stated that when the Morag Tong murdered one ruler too many, they were banished from Tamriel, but Vivek let them stay if they worshipped him instead of Methala. Butthurt, Methala, now the bride of Sithis, led a new organisation, her Dark Brotherhood, as the Night Mother, which checks out with what we know in Daggerfall, as the guild openly worshipped Methala then. This would make the Night Mothers we meet either mortal incarnations, technically doing a bit of mantling, proxies with the same name, or Methala's vessels, although I think this is more so a side effect of Bethesda changing the Dark Brotherhood over time. By Skyrim, it does feel like the Dark Brotherhood is only meant to be about Sithis, and they are meant to only have one god, thus leading us to another story about the Night Mother. There was once a respected member of the Morag Tong, a Dunmer woman whose name is lost to history, living in a village that would one day become Bravil in Cyrodiil. Sithis, the void itself, spoke to her, and it should be noted that Sithis was lightly worshipped by the Morag Tong beforehand, although that seems to have calmed down in modern times. Because of the Morag Tong's recent sorrows, having killed one too many rulers and attracting too much unwanted attention, Sithis was displeased with the lack of souls being sent to him in the void, and it was up to this Dunmer woman to fix things. Sithis rolled up to her bedchambers one night with a rose in his mouth and his rhizometer cracked up to the max. Man, that was a sentence and a half. Anyway, she then had 5 children, all at the same time I think, so that would make them quintuplets, but after 2 years she would murder her own children, sending them to their father in the void. Hence why we see 5 skulls on the Dark Brotherhood's sanctuary's door. The people of would-be Bravil were so disturbed by this act that they burned the woman's house down, apparently reducing her to ash. But 30 years later, the first listener heard the Night Mother's voice, and the Dark Brotherhood was born on that day. This explains why the Night Mother we see in Skyrim looks like the bark of a brisket, but this is all so weird. The Sithis I'm describing here, the Void itself, who wants his own 5 kids sacrificed, is meant to be the same loving mother, Padomay, and bringer of chaos, Padomay, all at the same time. How can one be the Dreadfather and yet the loving mother all at once? How can both be true? Well, it's the Elder Scrolls. That's how.
Sweet mother, send your child unto me, for the sins of the unworthy must be baptized in blood and fear.
When looking at any god in the Elder Scrolls universe, you have to understand that they often have different forms based on the different interpretations from cultures all around the world. Thus, from those different interpretations come contradictions. Different people see things in different ways. Anu and Padomay are the most primal of the forces, the most broad and vague, and thus are interpreted with drastically different characteristics, so much so that despite being opposites, they actually overlap. In basic terms, Anu is Stasis and Order, while Padomay is Chaos and Change. The Dark Brotherhood see Chaos and Change as hunger, as the void that wishes to take away, causing said chaos and change. The void itself is seen as a cold place, and Lucien Lechance is known to have come from there when summoned after death in Skyrim, saying that it is a place with no pain, although he can feel disturbances as Sithis' will. This is where overlap with Anu confuses things, because the Dunmer see the personification of Stasis and Order as nothing. Nothing represents stasis more than, well, nothing. A void, which is confusing because the void is Sithis' whole deal. Sithis is also distinctly male, the Dreadfather, and he's not a very good father. I mean, that's an understatement of the year. But the Khajiit interpretation of him is a her, Padomay. She is a mother, and a pretty decent one as celestial mothers go. In some stories, Anu and Padomay are siblings, others have them as mates, and then there are these weirdos. The Clockwork Apostles, who follow or followed Sotha's seal, claiming that Padomay didn't actually exist. Anu is the one true creator in their eyes, with Padomay, or the idea of Padomay, coming from the void, creeping into the cracks of the world, which would partially explain the Sithis we see from the Dark Brotherhood. So instead of focusing on contradictions, of which there are many, can we build an idea of what Padomay actually is with things that cultures actually agree on? Well, no. But we can try.
You're not human, that's clear. So what are you? A demon? A djinn?
Do you really wish to know?
Yes.
No, Geralt. You don't. This one time I shall spare you, and not grant your wish.
Padomay is fundamentally chaos and change. In every culture, they are responsible for great change that creates the world as we know it. Whether that be destroying 12 worlds so that one, Nirn, can be made, or by sending Lorkhan to make Mundus just to shake things up a bit. Padomay also comes from the void, and retreated to it, whether as Padomay to give birth to Lorkhan, as Padomay in the Anuad on several occasions, or as Sithis, which he makes his realm. Thus, the creatures and beings claimed by the void are of Padomay/Sithis, such as Lucien Lechance, or Khajiit born under a dark moon. Something else that is common in interpretations of Padomay is hunger. We have the Dark Brotherhood Sithis wanting a constant stream of souls into the void like a sushi bar conveyor belt, and while claiming these souls often brings chaos and change within Mundus, it's clear that the volume of souls is important to Sithis too. There is also the Redguard interpretation of Padomay, called Akel, the hungry stomach. Akel is actually the stomach of Sitark, the first serpent, who is Redguard Anu. Sitark has the world to come in its scales, but because it's coiled there's no room to grow. There was nothing but the void outside Sitark, thus help came from the serpent's own stomach, Akel, who made Sitark devour itself, including its own heart, and after death, Sitark's scales were shed, causing it to fuse with Akel and be reborn, making the world serpent Satakal, allowing the world to form. In short, hunger, a home in the void, having some relationship with a form of Anu, and having a hand in creating the world as we know it are all reasonably consistent characteristics of Padomay between different pantheons, outside of being the personification of changing chaos, of course. But this tells us very little, let's be honest, and thus there is something we have to address. I'm not entirely convinced Padomay is meant to be understood. Anu and Padomay are more than just gods. They are beyond the Aedra and Daedra. They are right at the top of the godly food chain. And while the usual gods we see get worshipped personify more specific concepts, like being absolutely mental, these two present primordial concepts. In some ways, Anu and Padomay represent everything and nothing. They are sometimes called the is or is not, light and dark. Trying to understand such primordial concepts is not an easy task. It makes my head spin like I'm Lovecraft trying to understand the electromagnetic spectrum. That seems like a niche reference, but another way of looking at Padomay is comparing him, her, they, whatever, with the Greek god Chaos. Well, I say god, Chaos isn't really a god. He quite simply is. He is something primordial, the possibility of literally anything ever all at once. Padomay represents this in some ways as personification of chaos as well, or rather half of this. For when he and Anu came together, whether as twin brothers, mates, or even snake and stomach, everything can come from nothing. It's simply an idea beyond us. I would say it's like ants trying to understand humanity, but that feels like the difference between mortals and Aedra and Daedra. I've not really got a comparison for trying to understand Padomay, Sithis, or whatever you want to call them. That's what makes the concept of this deity so terrifying in a kind of existential way. And you should fear them, for the victims of the Dark Brotherhood are plentiful, but you should also thank them, for the world of the Elder Scrolls would not have come into existence without Padomay. Anu, Order and Stasis could not make existence from nothing. It needed chaos and change. Anu needed Padomay. Then again, there is one above Padomay in the Elder Scrolls. One above all. And his name is God Howard, our Lord and Saviour. I beg you please, the Game Awards 2027, give us a look at the Elder Scrolls 6, please. I need the content.
The gods of Olympus have abandoned me.
Thank you for sitting or standing through a bit of a weird one and making time between World Cup matches. Sithis, Padomay, Fadomay, or whatever name you want to use, is one of the most confusing entities around, mainly because you still feel their presence through the Dark Brotherhood as a sort of evil Knievel void being, but that ends up watering them down in the eyes of many who aren't as well versed in the lore. Padomay is a primordial being older than the world itself. And while I've explained a lot here, actually understanding is another task. Still, I hope you've enjoyed this relatively cursory look at them, and if you did, consider doing the YouTube ritual of liking, commenting, and subscribing. I'm pretty sure it beats doing the Black Sacrament. That seems like so much work. Anyway, hopefully I'll see you in another video.
And sails fly at half-mast in the